All right, so the 3 best quarterbacks coaches in the Southeastern Conference. I put it out on Twitter. We talked about it on the radio show today. And at this point now, making this video, I'm not certain that I got them in the right order. 3 best quarterbacks coaches in the SEC. Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach, and Dan Mullen. Not necessarily in that order. In fact, the order that I put out there on Twitter today was Dan Mullen 1, Mike Leach 2, Lane Kiffin 3. Pretty confident about that, going off of memory, and then started looking up numbers and stats on the radio show. However, I'm not so sure that they aren't interchangeable, and you know, different coaches are different, different systems are different. Obviously, like the numbers and the quarterback development, a lot of the stuff quarterbacks have done in Dan Mullen's system over the years, much different than what quarterbacks have done in the Mike Leach system. What I think it is the sign of a good quarterbacks coach is not only are they successful, do they win, it's hard to measure the leadership intangible, but looking at statistics, did they get better? These are 3 that over the long haul in their career have always had quarterbacks put up big numbers and have always had quarterbacks overachieve and do better the next year than they did the year before. All right, first up, Dan Mullen. Josh Harris, Bowling Green. In 2001, Josh Harris played in 10 games. He threw for a little over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Harris then came back the next year under Mullen, played in 12 games, doubled his passing numbers to 2,425, doubled his touchdowns up to 19 touchdowns, more than doubled them, and did throw more interceptions, but his numbers obviously bigger, much better throwing the football in year 2 under Mullen than in year 1 under Mullen, and only a 2-game difference. Alex Smith at Utah. In 2003, Alex Smith played in 11 games for Mullen and Meyer. He completed 65%, 2,247 yards, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The very next year, Smith comes back in 04, played in 1 more game, 12 games, upped his passing yardage to 2,952, more than doubled his touchdown throws to 32, and only threw 4 interceptions. Wins a Heisman Trophy. You know, incredible numbers for Alex Smith, #1 overall draft pick. Now let's go to Florida. Dan Mullen, the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach there. Chris Leak in 05 under Mullen played 12 games, 62%, 2,600 yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 picks. Comes back in 06, plays in 14 games, 2 more, ups his completion percentage to 64, ups his yardage to over 2,900, throws 3 more touchdowns, did double his interceptions. So, you know, he's more productive, did throw more picks the following year. Now, this is the one that to me is really interesting. You didn't see this one coming. Tim Tebow at Florida did not always improve his numbers year on year under Dan Mullen. If you just look at the last 2 years that Mullen was at Florida, 2007 and 2008, in 07, Tim Tebow played in 13 games, 67%, a little over 3,200 yards, 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Then you come back in 08, the next year under Mullen, Mullen's last year at Florida, Tebow played in 14 games. His completion percentage went down to 64%. His passing yardage dropped by about 500 yards, down to 2,746. And he threw 2 fewer touchdowns. Now, he did throw 2 fewer interceptions as well, but that's kind of the outlier in the Mullen career. It's interesting, Tebow may be the greatest player he ever coached. Now let's go to Mississippi State. Let's look at Dak Prescott at Mississippi State. 2 big years, junior, senior year for Prescott under Mullen. In 2014, Dak played in 13 games, 62% completions, 3,400 yards, 27 touchdowns, 11 picks. Dak then came back his senior year and under Mullen improved everything. Still played in 13 games, but upped his completion percentage to 66%. Upped his passing yardage to 3,793. Upped his touchdown total to 29 TD passes and lowered his interceptions down to 5 total on the year. Side note, listen, there has been a narrative, not a narrative, that's not the right word. There has been a perception that people have spread over the years about Dak Prescott that, #1, he wasn't a thrower or a passer in college. And they'll tell you, oh, well, in 2014, when they went to number 1, he was mainly a runner, and then he threw the ball some his senior year. That could not be farther from the truth. You look at these numbers, you go back and watch the film, Dak has always been a very good passer mechanically, and even in 2014, he was excellent throwing the football. And in 2015, I saw every snap, calling the games on the radio. He was an elite passer in terms of a college quarterback his senior year in 2015. Anybody who then or now says otherwise does not know what they're talking about. And then finally, Kyle Trask. Let's just look at him. Last year at Florida, you know, in 1 year, he didn't really play much 2 years ago for Mullen at Florida. Last year had to play. And in 12 games goes 67%, 2,941 yards, 25 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. He's second only in the league to Joe Burrow passing the football last year. And so if the historical deal of Mullen quarterbacks improving in year 2, if that takes place with Trask, then you're looking at a 3,000-yard passer, a guy whose touchdown interception should be through the roof this year. And again, you've got like a historical data of a decade or more, a couple of decades of Mullen quarterbacks that all came back and improved, and we got to see if Trask can do that this year. All right, now let's look at Mike Leach. His numbers from his quarterbacks, they all kind of speak for themselves, because you know, you can go all the way back to Tim Couch at Kentucky when Mike was the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach there for 2 years with Tim Couch. In 97, Couch threw for 3,800 yards at 66%. The very next year, they improved both of that. He goes up to 4,275 yards and 72% completion. He's a number 1 draft pick. Let's fast forward to Texas Tech. His first quarterback at Texas Tech was KLIFF Kingsbury. Kingsbury was a sophomore in 2000, and that particular year, KLIFF throws for 62%, 3,400 yards, 21 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. The very next year under Mike Leach in that system, he improved his completion percentage way up there to 69%, improved his passing yardage a little bit, improved his touchdown to interception ratio in a big way, 25-9. And so there's a guy who, you know, played for Mike at Texas Tech. The numbers from a lot of these Texas Tech quarterbacks, they speak for themselves. B.J. Simmons, a 65% passer, just under 6,000 yards and 52 touchdowns. It's incredible. Graham Harrell's numbers really do speak for themselves. You know, from the first year that Graham Harrell played for Mike Leach to the second year, he went from 67% completion to 72% completion. He went from 4,500 yards to 5,700 yards. He went from 38 touchdowns up to 48 touchdowns. So Mike Leach again, and that's just Texas Tech. We can see the same thing if we look at Connor Halliday and Luke Falk and those guys at Washington State, improving from one year to the next. And that, to me, is the true sign of a great coach. All right, and finally, Lane Kiffin. You could look across Lane Kiffin's entire career, go all the way back to USC as an assistant, and just year after year, obviously productive. And he's coaching great players at USC, and even at Alabama, he's coaching guys that are highly recruited. But if you just look more recently, look back at the 3 years he was an offensive coordinator for Nick Saban at Alabama. At Alabama, his first year as OC in 2014, he takes a converted running back in Blake Sims, small, 5'11", 6 feet tall, and coached him in that offense to a point where he became, at the time, the all-time single-season passing leader at the University of Alabama. And it stood until Tua Tagovailoa came and broke it. That year in 2014, Blake Sims threw 391 passes, goes 65%, 3,487 yards, 28 touchdowns passing, and 10 interceptions. And yes, was productive running the ball, but was not a 50-50 run-pass dual threat type of quarterback. What Lane Kiffin did with Blake Sims was phenomenal. And after his college career, he didn't even get a chance. Nobody even sniffed at him as a quarterback in the NFL. The very next year, he had another quarterback, Jake Coker, in 2015. You guys remember, Coker was really good. He threw 393 passes, complete 67%, a little over 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Super productive under Lane Kiffin that year in 2015. In the last 10 games of the 2015 season, Coker led the country with a 72% completion percentage. And then in 2016, his final year at Alabama, it's Jalen Hurts, true freshman, freshman of the year, newcomer to the year in the SEC, all that stuff. He coached Jalen Hurts, a true freshman, in 2016 to 382 attempts, 63% on those, 2,780 yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Just tremendously productive in every way with 3 different players in 3 different years. Then you look over the last few years at Florida Atlantic. Jason Driscoll in 2017 goes for over 2,200 yards. Then the last 2 years, here's that improvement I talk about with Lane Kiffin. 2018, Chris Robinson, the former Oklahoma guy, 62%, 2,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, 12 picks. They turn around and last year, he improved everything in 2019. Same 62%, but 3,700 yards, so a 1,200 yard improvement in passing yardage, and went up to 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. More than doubled his touchdown total, cut his interceptions in half, and that's year over year under Lane Kiffin at Florida Atlantic. It really is clear to me that those 3 coaches are the best historically, and in their career to this point, the best 3 quarterbacks coaches in the SEC. I'm not so sure I wouldn't switch that around and say that Leach is number 1, Mullen number 2, and Kiffin number 3, but they're different. Their systems have been different. They're the top 3 quarterbacks coaches in the SEC in my mind, no question about it.